Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to take a look at Force of Virtue. So Force of Virtue is a new game put out by a new company called Masterstroke Games, and they reached out to me about a year ago, asking if I would like to do a review. And I didn't check that email, and by the time I checked the email, the actual account, it had been a couple of months, and I sort of said, yes, I'm still interested. We went back and forth, and then I had to move. As you can see, I'm in a new place. I moved went on holidays, came back, moved into a new new apartment. So eventually it's all worked out, but just up front, they're not paying me any money, but they did give me free access to all the cards so that I could take a look at the system. And I did get a free PDF copy of the rulebook, but so did everyone. It might even still be available for free on the website. It was a sort of a free promotional, here's the free rulebook, because of an upcoming Kickstarter, which I'll talk about at the end, which they didn't ask me to talk about, but I think is interesting because it's where the game's growing. So, Force of Virtue. So if you've not seen these reviews before, the way I do it is 5 things that I like or that are generally seen as positive things. Something that makes the game special, which I'll do at the end. And 3 things that are maybe not the most favorite things for myself or for people in general. They're not always my personal opinions, although almost always they are. But some things, like there are certain things people just dislike in games that I know from personal experience, and I include those here. So let's get started with Force of Virtue, which is a game set in the Italian Renaissance, specifically around Italy, specifically around Rome, although we'll talk about that later. So the first thing that's really cool is that you have this system of virtues. So you've got prudence, speed, audacity, and fortitude. And these are virtues of, I think it's swordsmanship. These aren't the sort of traditional virtues, although prudence, prudence and fortitude. Anyway, these are the sort of virtues of swordsmanship it goes into it in the rulebook from an Italian sword master. So it's even the stats are historically based. And the way it works is you have a system of actions and virtue and faith. And so what you do is you can take as many actions as your action points allow. I don't know if I can put a card up. I'll put a card up and block out bits, so you can't use it. So you have actions and faith. Faith is the amount of dice you can roll. Actions is the amount of actions you can take. So you can dump all of your faith on a single action and then not take another, or you can do one on one, one on another, or you can do 2-1, 1-2, and you're rolling. So let's use movement as an example. So the way you move is you spend as many dice as you want. It can be from any of the 4 virtues. So let's say you roll 3 dice in prudence. You're going to prudently move, and you say you've got 3 prudence and 2 actions. So you're going to roll 2 dice in the first, and then you're going to use your second action to attack. You're going to attack someone. You're going to charge them, or you're going to retreat and shoot them or something like that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So you'd roll 2 dice for movement, and those 2 dice become D3s. So if you roll a 4 and a 5, you'd pick the highest. 5 becomes 3, and you add that to the amount of 3, which is sort of like a baseline. So you move 3 plus D3, and you pick the highest dice, which is kind of cool. But what makes it even better, what's put it on my list, is that if you roll a 1 or a 6, you crit fail or you crit succeed. And what that means is, depending on which virtue you used, you have a different critical fail and a different critical success. Going off memory here, the prudent critical failure is you move directly away from the enemy instead of towards them. You get the prudence of not being close to that person. And if you critical succeed, something else happens. I can't remember exactly what off the top of my head. There's a whole bunch for moving, shooting, and fighting, which are the only ones that you can crit on. And so the more dice you roll, the less failure chances you have. So for example, you really, really want to shoot this guy. You need to get this guy before he runs into cover. And so you're going to use all your actions to shoot him. And you roll 1, 1, 6. The 2 1s would normally be critical fails, but you take the highest roll and you use a 6. So it's kind of cool. I like that. I like the idea of more dice meaning more successes and less failures. Although you're never guaranteed, you can roll 3 ones before. We've all done it. But that whole thing of like, I'm rolling 1 dice, I'm gambling. I'm gambling on this movement action. I'm gambling on this shooting action so that I can use another 2 dice later on. And you expend your virtues and then you regain them at the end of the next turn. Or they can lose them permanently through cards and stuff. And what virtue you use is going to be important, like, how am I going to shoot with my audacity or my speed or my prudence or my fortitude, because the different crits have different effects. So you might say, man, I really love the prudent critical effect when I move, but it's even better when I'm in combat. So I'm going to save my prudent virtues when I'm in combat, and I'm going to expend my audacity to move, just off the top of the head. Which is really cool. I like that. I think that's a fun little mechanic for a game. So the second thing that I really like is that it's sort of like a deck building light type thing. And by that I mean your army selection is from a deck. And that deck also includes different types of cards that give you buffs and bonuses. And that sort of thing. We'll put that card back up with the bits blocked out. So the bit we need here is the logistics. So logistic cards, I think normally you only about half your deck be logistic cards, because these are your troops and your armor and that sort of stuff. So you get a capo, which is your boss, and he's always wearing very heavy armor and has a sword or a mace or something, which have impacts on the game. And you have mercenaries or baseline troops. I mostly looked at the mercenary one, I can't remember the name of them now. I'll put it here, which was my favorite list, although the French had some really cool stuff too. So the way it works is you can build an army with just a single figure, which there is a intro starter list with just a single figure, sort of a Terminator-esque thing. So you could do Ezio running around if you wanted to do sort of Assassin's Creed type stuff. But most of your armies are going to be made out of a few bands of troops that comes in groups of 3s. Mostly come in group of 3s. So you buy a group of, say, mercenaries with pikes, but you don't really like pikes. You want them to have. You buy a group of mercenaries with pikes, but you'd rather they had swords and shields. Where you buy another logistics card, which lets you swap their weapons out for swords and shields. And the same with some skirmishing troops. You buy some skirmishing mercenaries. You'd rather they had arquebuses, the firearms or crossbows, and you use that card to give them firearms or crossbows, instead of the sort of short bows and javelins and things that they would come with. So your army selection is done with your cards, and you can have more troops and less. I can't remember the name of them. Sorry, I had a few games the other week with a friend of mine to sort of test this out before I did this review, and I was always forgetting the names of the different types of cards. I'll put them down below me here. So these cards do things like increase your critical chances to a 5+, or permanently debuff your enemies, or let you do things that are interesting. So they're sort of cards that impact the way the game flows. And so the more you spend on your logistics, the less you've got for tactics. And the other way around, you can be a really good tactical hand with not too many troops on the board, or you can have some super elite troops with not too many tactics, but they've got super heavy armor, heavy armor, and big two-handed swords or halberds and things like that, with some really great heavy crossbowmen backing them up. So you can sort of have a elite or a mixed force, and you build all that with the army deck, and there's no fiddling around with points. You're like, I'm 2 points short. You just have 15 cards and you work from that, or more cards. The games that we play with 10 or 15 cards, but you can go right up. 3. The factions are pretty flavorful. So what I was expecting when I saw this game was, okay, cool. There'll be a bunch of different mercenary groups, and you have decks of cards, and you sort of build your hand with this, and then there you go. But in reality, the decks are your whole faction included in them. The Condottieri, which is the deck I was trying to remember the name of earlier, your mercenary faction. They're not really vanilla, but they're pretty standard. The French faction has some really cool knights in it. So if you like knights and probably a one-man army, there's some cool card combos in there for the French. Each faction has its own theme and vibe.
Just the vibe of the thing.
It's sort of got a vibe to it.
It's the vibe, and no, that's it. It's the vibe. I rest my case.
That was sensational.
So the factions really do feel unique and the way you build an army and the way you play a game will change depending on what faction you have. Some factions lean much more towards having troops on the table with good equipment, and some factions lean towards having not so great troops on the table but some really, really good cards in your hand that you can play to mess with your opponent and to really buff your own troops, to sort of give them the benefits that are really, really good at the time they need them, rather than having pretty good benefits all the time. So the factions definitely have flavor, which is something I wasn't really expecting. I was expecting a much more bare bones system than what we got, which is really cool. Something to add on to that as well is that it's a miniatures agnostic game. I'll go into the end of what I think a really good starting set would be, which is what I plan on getting myself. So you don't need a particular type of figures. You can get figures from anywhere, really. You don't need too many figures either, depending on, if you want a one-man army, you can do it. Wouldn't recommend it. It looks fun, but I don't know if you'd be getting a lot of replay out of it. So you can just pick up 2 or 3 blister packs from Perry, or you can pick up this plastic set that I'm going to recommend. So you can have a few different factions sitting around on the go at the same time. It's pretty cool. Number 4, and this is something I'm a big fan of, so I had to include it. It has a scenario generator and a campaign capable. It's campaign capable, and it's got 3 different types of campaigns depending on which one you want to do. So there's a campaign for an evening, so you can have a few games linked together. In that one, the games have time limits for both players. So one person's the good guy, one person's the villainous person. And you got to win the game in 30 minutes, or it defaults to the protagonist, or you got to win the game in an hour, or it defaults to the villain. It's a really quick story to get over in a night, all the way up to a campaign that says at the beginning of it, make sure people are committed to this, because this will take a few months and should be seen as like a recreation of a TV series length bit of drama. Three Musketeers type stuff, or probably not earlier than that, obviously, but sort of a long running theme that's going to play out, which is really cool, because I love stuff like that. It really is a great idea to have multiple different lengths of campaigns, which is not something I've seen an awful lot. I almost put it in the special category, but I think I've seen something a bit extra for the special category. But yeah, the campaigns and the scenario generator, I'll do up a little scenario generation at the very end live, so that I can just show you how it works, which is really cool. I love it. I love games that add things in them that you don't just need to play the game, which is going to go on to number 5. But anyway, I love the idea of having scenarios that mean something. So you're not just like, okay, my condottieri are fighting your Spaniards here in Rome somewhere, and we're just going to slash one another until someone's dead, and then we'll call it an evening. It's sort of really fun to have these little scenarios. Number 5, they've included optional rules but not advanced rules. And what I mean by that is the game itself is pretty straightforward, actually. It doesn't take a lot to learn how to play. They've got a video on their website that's like an hour and a half long-ish. I think it's an hour and 20. Which basically, you watch that, you know how to play the whole game. But there are optional rules in the back, which underneath the rule, they also have a thing that says, these are the pros of this one, and these are also the cons, which is cool. And you can pick and choose them. There's some things like light armored troops move faster than heavily armored troops. So instead of having 3 as your movement rate, it's your armor. So 2+ armor is pretty heavy, or 1+ armor for like full Milanese plate, as opposed to guys with very little, which is about 5+. So your skirmish troops suddenly become a lot more mobile, but at the same time, as it says in the thing, it's a 2-foot square board, and now you're moving 9 inches a turn, which can be pretty game breaking. So it's up to the players that want to do that. And by presenting them as optional rules, there's no pressure on you. Normally when you see a thing that says advanced rules, it means like, okay, when you take the training wheels off, when you're ready, you can play the game properly with these rules. They sort of put a bit of pressure on you to be like, okay, I better learn these ones, and then I'll put the advanced rules in. And oh my goodness, the game's changing. I don't like some of these advanced rules, but oh well, they are the advanced rules, and everybody else is using them. But keeping them as optional, it's adding even more variety to the game, and it's adding even more customizability to the game, which I think is really cool. With the scenario editor and the deck building, I think having more flexibility is much better. And I personally, after looking at them, I don't think I would use too many of those optional rules. They look cool, But certainly as just getting into it, I think that having them as optional rather than advanced is great, because it doesn't mean it means I don't have to try and climb some sort of ladder to reach the full potential of the game system. So 3 of the things that are perhaps not so great. First one, I'm going to include it because I always include this: random movement. It's not that big a deal. It's 2 inches. The minimum you can move without, well, you critical fail anyway, but the minimum you can actually move is 4 and the maximum is 6 outside of criticals. 2 inches is really not that big a deal, but some people just froth at the mouth with random movement, man. Some people do not like it. I'm pretty either way with it. I think it can add a lot to games. I think it's kind of cool when someone's just out or they just get in because of random movement. But I know some people really dislike it. So this game uses random movement. If 2 inches is going to bug you that much, it's probably not the person I want to be gaming with. But there are ways around that by using the alternative rules for movement in the optional set. But yes, random movement is probably something that is one of the downsides of this system. Number 2, you get lots of cards and tokens and things that you use to keep track of your statistics, your stats. And your troops are represented by cards, and their equipment is another card that you attach to them. And you've got cards that you discard and cards that come back all the time. And it can get a bit cluttered and a bit overwhelming. Overwhelming is a strong word, but you can look down and there's this giant stack of cards and tokens over here, and you go, what does all of this mean? Which after a few games you'll start to figure it out. But I know some people hate having a whole table full of cards and tokens and then the miniature game over here. And I'm not the biggest fan of cards like that, my stats on a card, but that's how it works. So it's the way the game is working, and it's one of the things I love was the card building aspect of it, and the cards giving you your force. But it's probably the shadow side of that, or the other side of that, is the fact that you have to reference this giant sort of stack of cards and tokens, which if you're not a big fan of, it can be a bit off-putting. But honestly, after a few games, it became pretty simple, and it kept it going much smoother than going back to a rulebook. So it's a personal preference type of thing. And finally, the third point that's maybe not so great is the sort of limited scope and rules. There is a Kickstarter coming out, which I sort of referenced earlier, to incorporate cavalry and sieges, which is really cool. It's a brand new game, so if you're going to jump into it going, I'm going to do all this cool stuff and have these cavalry and these sieges and play games set outside of Rome or whatever, it's probably not at that stage yet. I'm almost certainly will get there, especially with the cavalry and stuff coming out in a Kickstarter that's coming up quite soon. I couldn't find the exact date, but I'll put the link to it in below, and you can hit the remind me thing on Kickstarter, and it'll send you a reminder when it launches. Right now the scope is a little limited just to Rome, although you can easily stretch that out. There's potential here. There's some great potential. The sort of games I had, because I don't have figures for this, were actually done with these figures, which are Wargames Atlantic's halflings, who happen to just have pikes and halberds and swords and shields and bows and crossbows now that you can 3D print them. So I just did that, proxying them, or not even, just using those miniatures, and it worked fine. It's a guy with a spear, just happens to be a halfling. So I think that there's so much potential for them to expand, but at the moment it is a little limited to just Rome, just the Renaissance period, and just infantry for the next few weeks at least. So I enjoyed this game. I'm definitely going to pick up a box to get me started properly with miniatures that aren't halflings. But again, I see so much potential in this War of the Roses stuff really easily. It's the same period. You would just need some new cards. Same with some Spanish versus possibly, or Spanish versus Spanish and stuff like that as well. But you could easily do Spanish versus Aztecs and Mayans. Especially with the cool Wargames Atlantic stuff that's come out. That would be pretty interesting one to do. They might have to rejuggle a few things, and it would take a lot of work. But I mean, the expansion-wise, this game has got a lot of places to move into. Even fantasy, they could quite easily just rename a few things and make a complete fantasy game out of this. It's a great little system, and it's a great skeleton, which is what I look for in a system. Which is why I love Sharp Practice so much. Sharp Practice is a skeleton that you can graft so many different things onto. Sudan Sharp Practice is one of my favorites. and also mucking around a little bit with some 1870 Prussians and French Franco-Prussian war sharp practice. So a good skeleton of a game really gives a company room to expand, which means they're probably going to keep bringing out new stuff. So anyway, I would be very excited, and I am very excited, but I would be very excited if I looked at this and said, man, I'm not really interested in the Renaissance, but man, if they did some cool fantasy stuff, I'd be down for that. Even some sci-fi, you could quite easily expand this with, well, quite easily. You could expand it with a fair bit of manpower and work into all these crazy different settings. But I don't know if that's what they want to do, but certainly the door is open for them to do it. I think right now they're going to focus on getting the solid core aspects of the game down pat, which is probably what I would advise them to do. Let's get cavalry before we get lightsabers, sort of thing. So it's really great. Let me have a look at a starter set, and this is what I'm going to pick up myself personally, because I'm going to call this a 2-player starter set, and it's about $25 per person. It's a $48 box from my local down the road, or a couple of suburbs over, gaming shop, and here it is. It's the Perry Miniatures European Infantry box, 1450 to 1500. The rough dates. It's perfect for the time period we're looking at. So in this box, if you split it equally in half, which is super easy because it's all on sprues, one person takes half, the other person takes the other half. Pay $25 each. Each person would get 2 units of 3 crossbows, 2 units of 3 handguns. So you could use those crossbows as light crossbows, which are the default skirmisher weapon, one of them, and then you could use the other ones as handgunners. So you've already got there 1, 2, 3, 4 units, which is pretty good. 3 units of pikes, but you can also make 2 of those units as halberdiers or polearm armed troops, so which is really good. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 units already, and each player would get a knight in full plate armor, which is your capo, and a musician / banner bearer, which is also a unit you can have, which extends your command radius, which is pretty useful. I think that would be a great start for a condottieri or even any sort of force, really. War Games Atlantic would be great if you wanted a Spanish force. There's tons of stuff that the Perry brothers do, which would fit in perfectly with this, for Italian stuff, and Swiss as well. Warlord Games does great lunch decks, although the boxes can be a bit tricky because you'd have to buy 3 different boxes. But if you were doing another thing of lunch decks for Pikeman's Lament or something like that, this would be great. This is super cheap and easy to get into. Really great miniatures game. Just pick the biggest expense probably is going to be the faction deck, which is like $30. It's not that expensive. Great game. So that's sort of what I would recommend for someone wanting to get into it, would pick up the Perry Miniatures European Mercenary Infantry box, or if you know somebody who's picked up the War Games Atlantic Conquistador box, that's another great one. There's a few cool things out there. You could use some old Empire figures you've got laying around. Not perfectly historical and a bit chunky, but if you wanted to sort of take it out of Rome and put it into Altdorf, you could surely do that. Again, there's room for it to expand here. So before I waffle on too much, I just wanted to really thank the guys for reaching out to me. Thank you for the cards, the digital copies of all the cards. That was really fantastic. Gave me a lot of insight in how the different factions ran, which was good, which helped me sort of make up my opinion on some of the things I really liked about the game. So thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful day.